Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of In the Pink. I'm your host, April Federico. If you've been on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, which you most likely have over the past few years, you've probably noticed that everyone is suddenly speaking the language of psychology. I mean, people say things like, oh, my ex is a narcissist, or oh, that's gaslighting. Oh, I'm trauma bonded. Oh, I got a dopamine hit. And oh, that's my ADHD or my OCD or whatever. Or I'm triggered. On one hand, I think this is incredible because for decades, mental health wasn't something people talked about openly. In fact, millennials, and this is an actual fact, millennials are the very first generation to actually talk about mental health openly. I mean, therapy was stigmatized, neurodivergence was misunderstood, and many people suffered in silence. So, the fact that psychology has become part of everyday conversation is, in many ways, progress. But there's also a downside. As psychological language becomes more popular, it also becomes diluted. Clinical terms often get stretched far beyond what researchers and clinicians actually mean. And that alone can create confusion, reinforce stereotypes, and sometimes make it harder for people with genuine mental health conditions to be understood. Today, we're separating psychology from pop psychology, which I talked about in my last episode. So if you haven't listened to that, go listen to it. And we're going to be looking at some of the most commonly misused terms on social media. Number one, narcissism. Let's start with the biggest one. According to social media, everyone has dated a narcissist. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe how many times I've freaking seen this. Like, oh, your boss is a narcissist, like your roommate is a narcissist, your mother-in-law is a narcissist. Oh my God, that one personally makes me laugh. Not that my mother-in-law is a narcissist. I never even met the woman, but your ex who forgot your birthday, apparently also a narcissist. And here's the reality. Being selfish, arrogant, immature, or inconsiderate does not automatically mean someone has narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosable mental health condition with specific diagnostic criteria. And many people can display narcissistic traits from time to time without meeting the threshold for the disorder. And someone can behave hurtful or manipulative in ways without having a personality disorder. And that distinction matters because reducing every person, every difficult person, down to a narcissist oversimplifies, gosh, stumbling over my words, both relationships and mental health. Number two, gaslighting. This has become one of the most overused words online. Someone disagrees with you, gaslighting. Someone remembers an event differently, gaslighting. Someone lies, gaslighting. Not exactly. Gaslighting refers to a sustained pattern of psychological manipulation intended to make someone question their own memory, perception, or reality. It's not simply lying, and it's not every disagreement. It's a pattern that erodes a person's confidence in their own experiences. So, using the word for every conflict can make it harder to recognize genuine psychological abuse. Number three, trauma bond. This is one that gets mixed up all the time. Many people use trauma bond to mean we all went through something together, something difficult together. And that's not what the term means. A trauma bond describes a strong emotional attachment that develops within a cycle of abuse, where periods of harm are intermittently reinforced by affection, apologies, or rewards. And it is, sorry, about the dynamics of abuse, not simply shared hardship. Two friends surviving a stressful semester together are not trauma bonded. Let me say that again. Two friends surviving a stressful semester together are not trauma bonded. Okay? Okay. All right. So, number 4, triggered. Originally, the term trigger referred to cues that could activate intense psychological or physiological responses in people with conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Today, it's often used to mean like, oh, I didn't like that, or those aren't the same thing. Being offended, annoyed, uncomfortable, or challenged isn't necessarily being psychologically triggered. Understanding that difference helps preserve the seriousness of trauma-related symptoms. Number 5, dopamine. Social media has convinced everyone that dopamine equals happiness. And no, it does not. Dopamine plays important roles in motivation, reward prediction, reinforcement learning, and movement. And it's not simply the brain's quote unquote pleasure chemical. That's why people with ADHD may struggle to start tasks they genuinely want to do. The issue isn't wanting success. It's how reward processing and executive functioning interact. And understanding dopamine as a motivation system rather than a happiness button gives us so much more of an accurate picture of behavior. And 6, OCD. Like, people will say, like, I color code my planner, or, oh, I'm so OCD. No. Being organized is not the same thing as having obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD involves intrusive, unwanted thoughts, obsessions that create distress, along with compulsions performed to reduce that distress. And someone may wash their hands repeatedly, not because they enjoy cleanliness, but because they're overwhelmed by intrusive fears that something terrible will happen if they don't. And reducing OCD to perfectionism minimizes what can be a profoundly disabling condition. 7, ADHD. And if you've been following my podcast for the last couple weeks, you know that this one is personal for me. Since receiving my ADHD diagnosis as an adult, I've become much more aware of how often ADHD is just so casually used online. People say like, oh, I forgot my keys, I'm so ADHD. And ADHD involves much more than forgetfulness, okay? It affects executive functioning, including planning, working memory, emotional regulation, sustained attention, task initiation, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility. Everyone gets distracted. Everyone procrastinates sometimes. The difference is the frequency, severity, and impact on daily life. Number 8, hyperfixation. TikTok often uses hyperfixation to mean like, I really like that TV show. Hyperfixation generally refers to periods of usually intense focus on a topic or activity, often seen in ADHD or autism, where attention becomes difficult to shift despite competing priorities. Enjoying a hobby isn't automatically a hyperfixation, okay? Okay. Number 9, boundaries. And boundaries have become one of the healthiest concepts to ever enter mainstream conversation, but they're so often misunderstood. A boundary isn't something you impose on someone else. It's something you communicate about your own behavior. Like, I won't stay in conversations where I'm being yelled at. That's a boundary. Or you have to behave exactly the way I want. That is actually control. Healthy boundaries protect relationships rather than dominate them. Number 10, emotional intelligence. People often assume emotional intelligence means being emotional. And actually, emotional intelligence refers to recognizing, understanding, managing, and appropriately responding to emotions in yourself and others. It includes empathy, yes, but also self awareness, emotional regulation, and interpersonal skills. Being emotionally expressive isn't automatically the same thing as having high emotional intelligence. And here is why these definitions matter. You might be wondering, does it really matter if people use these words loosely? Yes, it does. Because language shapes understanding. It has for literally centuries now, okay? Ever since language was developed. When every disagreement becomes gaslighting, when every rude person becomes a narcissist, when every distraction becomes ADHD, we risk making it harder for people living with these realities to be taken seriously. And using terms like these doesn't mean policing language. It means respecting the experience behind those words. And just some final thoughts. One of the best things social media has done is make mental health conversations more accessible. One of the worst things it's done is convince us that 30-second videos can replace years of scientific research and clinical training. I mean, psychology is complicated. Human beings are complicated. And that's okay. The next time you hear a psychological buzzword online, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what does this term actually mean? Curiosity is one of the most valuable skills we can develop, not just in psychology, but in life. So, thank you so much for listening to In the Pink. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with someone who loves psychology, and I'll see you back next week for another science-backed conversation. Until then, stay curious and remember that understanding yourself begins with understanding the science. Mwah! Bye!